The Ultimate Spider-Man game is unique in what a snapshot of one specific era of comics it is. Most superhero games are usually based on movies or set in their own separate universes, like Guardians of the Galaxy, Insomniac's Spider-Man, or the Arkham games. It's rare, maybe only ever done here, that a game is written by the guy who also wrote the comic the game is based on. The authorship and style gives the game a feeling of authenticity, like we're dropped into a collection of issues. There was a before, and there will be an after. This is but an arc, which gives the game a certain freedom. It didn't have to be the start of anything, it didn't have anything riding on it other than being a product. That freedom and comic book feel were important, because that's how this game was able to focus on a character aside from Spider-Man. I want to talk about the story of this game and compare it to the comic that is based on it. Brian Michael Bendis. You may have heard of him, responsible for Ultimate Spider-Man, Jessica Jones, New Avengers, House of M, and ruining Superboy. Well, he wrote the story for this game too, at the same time that he was writing the Ultimate Spider-Man comic. However, the script for this game wouldn't get adapted into the comics until 3 years later in a 6-issue arc called War of the Symbiotes. The first 3 issues are nearly identical to the events of this game, but the last 3 are off-the-walls bonkers, and I'm excited to talk about them because they highlight the solid storytelling for Venom in this game. At the start of the game, we are given an explanation of events leading up to Peter and Eddie's confrontation. This is more or less a summary of the actual comic arc where Eddie makes his first appearance in the Ultimate Universe, aptly named Venom, and the first mission is a straight adaptation of issue 38. Since we just get a summary of an arc that doesn't have much to do with this game's story, there are some details that get glossed over or ignored, which I think adds some fun flavor. During this arc, there's a lot of mystery around what exactly happened to Peter and Eddie's parents. Eddie and Gwen Stacy attend a reggae concert at Eddie's college quad, the most 2000s cliche thing I've ever said, while Peter dons the black suit for the first time. And there's an overwhelming sense that Eddie is a scumbag. He tries to sleep with 15-year-old Gwen, and then throws a hissy fit when she won't let him, and his roommate actively hates him because he's a big tool. A major theme of the arc comes from Peter's dad, and boils down to his statement that there are some people you just can't understand, who will try and lash out at you for their own self-destructive behavior, but you can't take the blame. Yet, at the end of the arc, Peter still can't help but bear the burden of his perceived responsibility for Eddie's transformation. All he wants to do is help, but he stands alone in his failure. Since you're watching this, you may already know the story of the game, but here's a very quick and loose summary of Venom's narrative so we're all on the same page before finally discussing the comic version. Eddie's story is about hunting and being hunted. He goes on a rampage and is hunted down by Silver Sable's men. Later on, he senses Peter and goes to fight him, only to be captured by Sable for Bolivar Trask, the man who ruined Eddie and Peter's father's lives, to run experiments on Eddie. This leads to Venom's first test with chasing and fighting Electro. Back in Trask's holding cell, Adrian Toomes makes the connection between the suit and Spider-Man. Eddie says being around Spider-Man makes him feel more in control because he wore the suit in the past, and then spills the beans on who Peter is. So Trask wants to capture him to help with their research. Following this, Venom escapes from Sable and her goons, has a one-off fight with this Beetle guy, then reappears to attack Sable when she's fighting Peter, but Peter rescues her and kicks his ass, only to pass out alongside him. Venom wakes up in the Trask lab to find Peter turned into Carnage, and the two battle until Venom consumes him and gains full control of the suit. Now, with free will, he plans to make Trask pay for what he did to their fathers and to himself. Spider-Man stops him, but Eddie escapes in the end, eventually hunting down Trask in prison to get his revenge. Ironically, Peter learns the truth about their parents' death from Trask's files. After Eddie Sr. and Peter's father agreed to destroy the suit and start from scratch again, Eddie Sr. secretly kept it and transformed into Venom while on a plane, causing it to crash and killing everyone on board. The game ends with uncertainty. Peter knows Eddie is still out there, and Eddie has entered a new phase of his Venom life, but without any direction. free to tear shit up GTA style as much as he wants. This story has a tight cast of characters and one strong theme throughout: legacy. Despite its simplicity and short runtime, the climax is satisfying because all the core elements come together to deliver revelations and permanent changes that impact the two protagonists. Peter's able to get closure on the mystery around the death of his parents, which perfectly ties into his own struggle with Eddie. But also, what his father said at the end of the Venom arc about the self-destructive behavior of others is repeated in narration at the end of this game to further hit that point home. Knowing that Eddie Sr. and Eddie Jr. both succumbed to Venom provides a sense of tragic destiny for Eddie and reinforces the legacy/sins of the father theme that runs throughout both the original arc and this game. But that's juxtaposed with Eddie's newfound control over the Venom suit. He is changed by the end, perfectly represented by his new white spider symbol, which offers a dark sense of hope. While Spider-Man's story has been fairly light throughout this game, ending on a somber note, Venom's story has been a struggle to survive, but ends with a sense that he has moved beyond that. He has found himself through controlling the suit, something his father was never able to do, and something Peter cannot understand. The last shot of him in the game is of this epic leap from a skyscraper in the rain, balancing a sense of dread with a tinge of superheroics. Eddie's destiny is now his own. What will he do with it? This is a satisfying conclusion to both this game, as well as the story set up in the original comic arc, that remembers to treat Eddie as important, if not more important, than Peter. Releasing nearly 3 years later in 2008, Ultimate Spider-Man 123 kicks off the War of the Symbiotes arc. Written by Brian Michael Bendis and based on a script for the Ultimate Spider-Man video game, this story should be familiar to anyone who played the game. At least, it starts out that way. It begins with Eddie Brock's shocking return as a homeless guy telling his life story to people on a park bench, who he then eats. We learn that Eddie has been barely scraping by for the past few months. He is at the mercy of the suit and describes himself as having two minds. One that is just hungry, and the other that is wondering when someone is going to put him out of his misery. But recently, he came across Spider-Man, fighting the Rhino, and being in Peter's presence caused Eddie to feel the best he has ever felt with the suit. Something to note is the different timelines of this story. A good deal of it is told as flashbacks within flashbacks, which can get confusing, but is also vital to understanding the differences and the ending. Just keep in mind that this entire story is framed around Eddie telling it to people on that bench in the present day. A bit after the Rhino fight, Eddie starts to be hunted by Silver Sable and her Wild Pack. A few weeks later, he senses he's near Peter again, and this time goes after him. In this version of events, they come face to face and battle inside the museum while Peter's on a school trip. But Sable arrives to capture Eddie just the same. It's here that we flash back from the museum to after the Rhino fight. We hear the same butthole suit joke from the game, and Spider-Man encounters the Beetle for the first time. He follows Beetle to a Roxxon lab, where just like in the game, he steals a vial. Peter is then confronted by Nick Fury on the roof of the Daily Bugle, who tells Peter to stay out of this international incident involving Latvaria, specifically so Peter does get involved. This is the first major departure from game to comic. In the game continuity, all of this comes well after the museum, and it feels mostly like padding since the Beetle Latvaria plotline doesn't go anywhere. But stick with me here, because there actually is some payoff in the comic. The story flashes forward to after the battle at the museum. Eddie wakes up in captivity and is given the same spiel by Trask and Toomes. They're gonna run tests on him, and he doesn't have a say in the matter. This time though, the test is not Venom chasing Electro through NYC. It's an actual science-y experiment run by Toomes with the Wild Pack there for security. That's when the Beetle bursts in, knocks them all out with gas, frees Venom, collects a sample of him, and runs. Venom chases after him. There is something like this in the game, but it occurs right before the climax, and Beetle is left completely destroyed. Here, Beetle is saved at the last minute by Spider-Man. But Spidey suffers a serious headache, and the suit takes this opportunity to jump ship. As Eddie desperately cries out for it not to leave him, the suit attaches itself to Peter, giving us Black Suit Spider-Man once again, but more Venom-esque, particularly with the eyes. As if things weren't different and insane enough, there is not an ounce of the remainder of this comic story that has any overlap with the game. Peter fully loses himself to the black suit. Eddie, naked and alone, begs for it to come back to him, but to no avail. Sable and her wild pack struggle to take Spider-Man on as he goes full psycho mode, and this is when the Avenged Ultimates show up. I want you to just imagine how cool playing a level like this in the game would have been. Peter turns full-blown Venom. He takes Cap's shield, uses it to defend against the others, but is ultimately blasted by Thor's lightning and taken down. Peter wakes up at home, where he's scolded by Aunt May for staying out late, then makes his way to the Triskelion to talk to Fury about destroying the suit, but Fury says he won't do it. The suit is already in high demand, as seen by Trask and Beetle, and the next World War may be fought over Peter's father's invention. Pretty cool shit going on, right? Well, prepare to get really confused. The story spirals into the madness that is Ultimate Universe continuity when we are introduced to Gwen Stacy. Except, it's not really Gwen. She died a few arcs earlier, killed by Carnage. This is Carnage, who's taken on the form and I guess memories of Gwen? So, for all intents and purposes, this is Gwen Stacy, except it totally isn't. So yeah, what a wonderful element added in at the last minute. Doc Connors, now in prison, is asked to help Tony analyze this Gwen Carnage. I'm calling it Gwarnage. But when the good doctor comes to see what's up, the Green Goblin starts a riot, and Gwarnage escapes. Back at high school, Peter and MJ are interrupted by Eddie, who wants the suit back, threatening to expose Peter's identity if he doesn't help. Peter tries to get out of this situation with the support of the Fantastic Four, Nick Fury, or the Ultimates, but no one is around. Unsure what to do next, Peter goes back to his home and finds Gwarnage waiting for him. Deeply disturbing stuff. And this final issue is where things go fully off the rails. Peter talks to Gwarnage and finds out what her deal is. Then Eddie shows up to the house, and Aunt May pulls a revolver on him like she's Clint Eastwood, only for him to snatch it right out of her hands, making her into a big buffoon. Peter takes Eddie away from the house, somehow Gwarnage follows them, and then a whole lot of stuff happens that I have trouble making sense of. Essentially, Peter tries to use Gwarnage's situation as a teaching moment for Eddie, showing him that he escaped this life and scolding him for wanting it back, but in the middle of it, Gwarnage goes full Carnage to either attack Peter or Eddie? Either way, turns out some remnant of the suit was still in Eddie, and it's activated by contact with Carnage, so he's full-blown Venom again. Then, the two symbiotes battle for like a second. This is the titular War of the Symbiotes, with Venom ultimately consuming Carnage and spitting out Gwen Stacy, turning into this horribly designed, beady-eyed mess with no white spider. Having what he wants, Eddie then escapes into the sewers. This is the last time that Spider-Man and Venom interact in the arc. Really disappointing and a little strange, but oh, just wait. Back at the Triskelion, Stark goes through a whole spiel about how what remains of Gwarnage is genetically just Gwen Stacy now. All the symbiote that was part of her was absorbed by Eddie, leaving behind a molecular match of the Gwen who died. So they all treat it like Gwen is back to life, and I guess that's cool? Then, at the very end, we bring the story back around to Eddie on that bench, where he is once again doing his routine, talking to people about his life before consuming them. But it turns out that this last guy is the Beetle, who sucks Venom up into some container and flies off praising Latvaria. The end. There is no conclusion with Trask or Roxxon or Toombs or Sable or really even Eddie or anything. The story more or less ended up being an insane workaround to bring Gwen Stacy back to life, and that's really that. Extremely weird. So, the reason I wanted to talk about the comic story, aside from how bizarre it is, was to show how much more satisfying a narrative the game's version of events is for Eddie. I said it earlier, this game's story is no masterpiece, but it delivers a satisfying narrative for Eddie Brock and Venom, even more so than it does for Spider-Man. If you take a look at Spider-Man in this game, he's really just bouncing from enemy to enemy with no rhyme or reason. The Beetle encounter and run-in with Green Goblin go nowhere, and in retrospect served mainly as padding. It's Venom's actions that drive the main plot. And while Spider-Man does get more of an arc in this game than in the comic adaptation, Venom has a full story told. From mindless monster struggling to survive, to a man in control seeking vengeance against the unjust and corrupt. If you're a fan of anti-hero lethal protector Venom, this game gives you the ultimate origin for that journey, whereas the comic really dropped the ball. Don't get me wrong, there are things from the comic that I love way more than from the game. The story is much tighter and more engaging early on. The sequence of Spider-Man in the black suit and his confrontation with the Ultimates was ripe for a video game level. Could you even imagine? Forget the Ultimates, just playing as Black Suit or Venom Peter in this game, that would have been the perfect thing to blow the mind of my edgelord 10-year-old self. And the Beetle Latvaria stuff only works in the context of the comic. In the game, it's nonsensical and half-baked, with no payoff. Even as fucking strange as the Guarnage stuff was, I don't despise the idea of it, but it doesn't work for me because it fully pushes Eddie Brock to the side in a story that's supposed to be all about him. That's the real problem I have with the comic. At the end, Eddie doesn't get any closure like he does in the game. He doesn't hunt down Trask to get his revenge. He doesn't even really get control over the suit, because he still has to eat people in the park like a crazy homeless cannibal. The only thing that changes about Eddie is that he looks far worse, which is the complete opposite of the game, where he gets the white spider. And the comic gets the perfect opportunity to replicate what was done in the game when Venom absorbed Carnage and completed his transformation into the true Venom. But instead of perfecting his design with this sleek as hell symbol, they do this? Were ya high? I think Venom not having the symbol in this game works because it's symbolic of his character growth by the end of the game. It represents a genuine change for Venom. Plus, if you want to give a player the true Venom experience, it's important Venom looks like, you know, Venom. So even this little design change encourages players to continue leaping around Manhattan in the post-game just to soak in this majesty. I'll end my commentary on the different stories with a comparison of how each wraps up for Peter and Eddie. Why one feels epic and badass and satisfying, while the other feels jumbled. It all comes down to Trask. In the game, Trask is alluded to early on, then his presence is felt through Toombs and Sable, and then he becomes directly involved with his control of Eddie. To get the best return on his investment, he also brings Spider-Man into the fold, which kicks off the climax. Then, when Trask gets exactly what he wants, a way to control the suit, it blows up in his face, which he should have seen coming. The final fight incorporates all three main characters, Peter, Eddie, and Trask. It's the collision of Eddie's desire for revenge and Peter's responsibility to stop him. Trask's presence provides the perfect ending for both protagonists. Peter learns the truth about their parents' deaths, while Eddie takes his first action as a dark avenger. It all makes sense and feels purposeful. It's the logical conclusion of the lingering story threads set up in the original Venom arc. In the War of the Symbiotes arc, Trask becomes entirely irrelevant, which isn't that big of a deal. The game isn't satisfying because I just love Bolivar Trask. But the problem is that he is not replaced with any shared plot action, theme, or character to provide closure for both Peter and Eddie's stories. Gwen comes into the arc out of nowhere. A person Eddie actually has had some interaction with, but that's never brought up once, so they may as well be total strangers, and the Eddie Peter story falls off a cliff. Eddie's relationship with the suit also feels disjointed. At the beginning, he seems to hate having it, but once it's gone, he begs for it to come back, and that defines his entire personality until the end, without any explanation. It's like the story lost interest in Eddie, Trask, the origin of the suit, anything having to do with what we were actually reading about. The climax is not about the legacy of their fathers or the man who screwed them over. There is no conclusion at all. The story just sort of ends. And that sucks.